There will be a general election in Britain on the 8th of June, in 2 days' time. When the campaign was launched by Theresa May, the Conservative Party leader and current British Prime Minister, it was assumed that she was going to win a huge majority, since Jeremy Corbyn was regarded as an extremely weak opponent. Well, it hasn't quite turned out like that if the opinion polls are right. But before going into the general election campaign as such, let's look at what is happening inside the two major parties and in Scotland. These three are the variables which will determine who will win and who will lose on election day on June the 8th. The Conservative Party and the Labour Party are both split. The Conservatives have managed to handle their own divisions a bit better than Labour because their members of Parliament, even the ones who dislike Theresa May intensely, are more disciplined and they want to win again. What happened after Brexit and the decision of a majority of the British people to withdraw from the European Union divided the entire country. And this division is seeping its way, or has seeped its way, through every single party. Theresa May was the compromise candidate for the Conservative Party because the two leading Brexit cabinet ministers who had led the campaign to pull out of Europe, Michael Gove and Boris Johnson, fell out with each other even before the elections had begun for the new party leader, with Michael Gove saying he was going to stand himself and not back Boris, which he'd agreed to do earlier. Boris Johnson's spin doctors tweeted and leaked and said that this was because Gove had had long chats with his friends. The former Chancellor was George Osborne and possibly even Cameron himself, and they encouraged him to go for it to try and divide the right. Well, the result of this division was that a middle-of-the-road person, Theresa May, who had not been active on either side in the campaign to quit Europe, though she was officially in favor of remaining, she did not campaign, and there was a lot of grumbling amongst the Tory leaders who were fighting to keep Britain in the EU. But precisely because Theresa May had kept a low profile during the referendum, she was elected with a large majority, the leader of the Conservative Party, and automatically became the Prime Minister of Britain. It was assumed that she would wait till 2020 when the next election was scheduled. But as the months went by, it became obvious to her and her team that it might be more reliable to go for a quick election, a snap election, an immediate one, to try and defeat Labour and then run the country for the next 5 years without any problems and without too many questions being asked. And so this was a hit-and-run operation in a way. Hit Corbyn and run to the finishing line as soon as you can, and then establish a new Conservative government, which would not be on the same pattern as the Cameron-Osborne government, in the sense that it wouldn't be pandering to globalization, it would be more nationalist in character, though the same spin doctor was hired from Australia who had run David Cameron's campaign, Lynette Crosby. The lowest common denominator politics is his speciality. And he devised a phrase for her, which she has been using like a robot, non-stop, in the most bland fashion, sometimes with a stern face. We are the only party that will provide a strong and stable Britain. Challenging Corbyn on nuclear weapons, challenging Corbyn on Trident, creating an impression that come what may, Corbyn is not going to be up to the challenges that face Britain. Inside Labour, the situation has been very different. Attempts by the Labour right wing, the remnants of Blairite and some of Gordon Brown's former supporters, have been trying to drive Corbyn, grind him to dust, push him away, force him to resign, attack him, make him feel demoralized. No other Labour leader has faced a parliamentary Labour Party so hostile to him as Jeremy Corbyn has over the last 2 years. And yet he's taken them on. He's fought back. He's defeated them once when he won the leadership. They tried to find another candidate against him. The only person they could come up with was Owen Smith, a weak figure from Welsh Labour politics, who tried everything under the sun. At one point saying, unlike Corbyn, I'm not just a reformer, I'm a revolutionary. It didn't work, totally unconvincing. Then he started attacking Corbyn from the right, saying he's too extreme, etc. It was a confused and unpleasant campaign, preceded by a whole wave of media support for the challenger, but failed. Corbyn won again as leader of the Labour Party, and this second victory gave Corbyn enormous strength because it made it clear that regardless of who was in the parliamentary Labour Party, he had the support of Labour members at the rank and file level. And beyond the Labour members, he had actual support from lots of Labour Party sympathisers who were being stirred into activity again. He stirred the underground of Labour politics and turned out trumps. He won, and this victory then encouraged him not to go for broke in a foolish way. He made some compromises. He had to, unfortunately, on Trident, because the Parliamentary Labour Party and some of the trades unions wouldn't budge. And he said, we have to do this because Labour as a whole is not on my line. And in order to run a unified party, you have to make some concessions. But on certain key issues, he remained fairly firm. And these are interesting issues because what Jeremy Corbyn promised in the Labour Manifesto and what began to turn people to look at Labour as a potential government was the pledge to do something about the sad state of British transport, dramatic move to renationalise the British railways, take them back into public ownership. The second point, which he's always believed in and said a long time ago, but this time was brought into prominence, was that within months of being in office, Labour would end tuition fees for those wanting higher education. This excited young people a great deal, and if the reports are to be believed from Corbyn's camp, there has been a huge registration by young people who have been registering to vote. Many young people, of course, have no memory of a time when higher education was free, or when the state actually paid you money to go and get a university education. There were state grants available for less well-off kids who wanted to go to university. There's no memory of this anymore. For the students, it was a huge move forward, and so we can date the shift in Labour's fortunes to the launch of the Labour Party Manifesto. What, in essence, was Corbyn offering? All he was offering was a little bit, but an important bit, of traditional social democracy, which had been disallowed by the Blair-Brown leadership of the Labour Party, which was indistinguishable in many ways from Thatcherism, and in some ways even worse. And he was saying, no more wars, money on education, money on health, taking back some of the utilities into public ownership, and all of them when possible. This was just getting back to square one again, where things used to be before the so-called Thatcher Revolution, supported by Blair, Brown, Major, and Cameron, the previous prime ministers. Aware of the risk, May, the British Prime Minister, began to make concessions to, we are also interested in the lives of working class people, she said. Her spin doctor, Timothy, is from Birmingham, a great admirer of Joseph Chamberlain, and a working class Tory who believes all this. But what actually is going to be done is slightly different. The austerity measures and the economic measures being proposed to raise more money included, and this gave Labour another big leap forward, was the Prime Minister's statement that old people, people with dementia, could have their houses and homes forcibly requisitioned by the government in order to pay for their care. Corbyn immediately called this the dementia tax, and the word took on. Even right-wing newspapers started referring to it as a dementia tax, and within a week she had gone back on that as she saw how it was totally unpopular in the country in large, and retreated. No doubt they will do it if they win, but she had to retreat. This retreat cost her dear, because strong and stable, but turning around at the first sign of difficulty in her own election campaigning, because she'd admitted it, from her point of view, quite honestly, this is what they were going to do. When there was a huge backlash, she retreated. So whatever else she was neither strong nor stable. Then we saw another event which happened at a strange time in English politics, in the middle of the election campaign. And what made it even stranger was that, unable to take Corbyn on the social measures that he was proposing, they started a slanderous campaign of attack on him and said that Corbyn had been an IRA supporter, that he had supported a terrorist group. Well, Corbyn didn't find it too difficult to rebut this. A, he was never an IRA supporter. B, he said that he attacked all violence in that period, IRA violence, but also the violence of the British state against them, which provoked the cycle of events. And this they didn't like hearing, but he said it. So he wrote off that one. But for a whole week, the right-wing press was going on about Corbyn's IRA links. Absurd, and obviously designed to make him an untouchable in British politics. It wasn't just the right-wing press who did that. It was Andrew Neil on the BBC. It was other television stations, Corbyn IRA, McDonnell IRA, etc. And then Manchester erupted when a 22-year-old terrorist, suicide terrorist of Libyan origin, went into a concert hall and exploded himself and killed people even younger than him. The casualties were a couple of dozen, many others wounded and hurt, and we saw the same pattern that we've seen in France, in Bataclan, when someone drove his truck into people, or bombs in Berlin. It was part of the pattern of young, radicalized Muslims deciding that the only solution to their problems was some terrorist act, which they thought would publicize their cause, but which is always, always counterproductive. The mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, who had sat next to Corbyn in his first shadow cabinet, behaved with incredible dignity, expressing total solidarity with the victims, but refusing to pander to any form of hysteria against any community in Britain, in this case the Muslim community. So Corbyn dealt with the situation with a major speech, which I think could become, were he to get even close to victory, as probably the most important speech of this election campaign. At a time when the press was waxing hysterical, as it does, when the social media was filled with horrific rhetoric against the Muslim community as a whole, when a former journalist of the Daily Mail and LBC, Katie Hopkins, said that she felt that all Muslims should be wiped out. She was sacked the next day by LBC, but the damage had been done. So in the face of this hysteria, Corbyn stood up and said, it's a huge tragedy what happened, it's unacceptable, appalling, unsupportable, but we have to ask, why are these kids running riot? Kids brought up in our own cities. And he linked it very clearly and sharply to the wars that the United States and the European countries, including Britain, were fighting in the Arab world. He said it didn't happen before then. And this created havoc again in the camp of his enemies. What were they going to do? They denounced him as a traitor, etc., etc. The Defense Secretary, the Defense Minister, Michael Fallon, said Corbyn is accusing Britain of being responsible for the terrorist act. He wasn't. He was saying that Britain and the other European powers, led by the United States, had created a situation in which some young people thought this was the only way they could respond. They were wrong, but he said, unless you eliminate the causes of terrorism, it'll be difficult to eliminate terrorism. Very sensible, sane speech. And despite all the efforts of his opponents, the speech was not unpopular. His ratings rose. The week after Jeremy Corbyn made the speech, i.e. told the truth, like it's not told in the mainstream media, Labour, which had been 20 points behind, which had improved its ratings after the Manifesto launch by 4 or 5 points, found itself now, after the Manchester bombing, 4, 5, 6 points behind. A huge turnaround. You would have thought that at least some papers claiming to be liberal, like The Guardian, would have headlined this, Corbyn only 4 points behind, but they somehow couldn't bring themselves to do it because it contradicted what they had been saying about Corbyn for the last 2-3 years. And if it's not the IRA or Corbyn being weak on security, it's nuclear weapons. I've been astonished to see how many journalists, how many politicians, Labour, right-wingers, Conservatives alike, have been attacking Corbyn for saying that he would never be the person to push the nuclear button. What this argument against Corbyn designed to make him look weak, whereas the others have all said in the campaign against Corbyn inside the Labour Party, most of his opponents proudly said, we will push the button. Theresa May said she will push the button. But there's a problem here. No British politician has the power to push any button. This is a decision taken by the United States and its president and the generals in the Pentagon. They decide if and when they want British nuclear weapons, i.e. Trident, to be launched. There's no way in which Britain could do this. And this is why the whole question about sovereignty is not discussed. It's a bit of a joke. Because getting rid of the EU or leaving the EU is one thing. That means you can avoid some of their laws you don't like and the British Parliament can rule on them. But on the question of war and especially the use of nuclear weapons, it is absolutely not permitted for any British politician to take unilateral decisions. They can't do it. It's a pity Jeremy didn't say this, because it would have strengthened his case, saying, what are you prancing around, posturing and posing as a great nuclear power when you're completely under the thumb of the United States of America? Never mind, you can save it for next time. And so this turnaround has now created a new situation in British politics. The situation, as we see it, is this. If Theresa May is not able to get a landslide majority, which is why she went into the election, that will be seen by her Conservative supporters as a bit of a defeat. If she can only win between 5 and 10 more seats, that will be seen as a major defeat for her. If she loses her majority, I think people will regard that as a complete defeat. Labour is going to find it difficult to win, A, because of the electoral system. It's a first-past-the-post system, it's variable, it is basically undemocratic, it doesn't reflect what the majority wants, and this doesn't apply only to Labour, but to the Conservatives as well, and to other parties. Had there not been a first-past-the-post system as the only electoral system, Tony Blair wouldn't have got a majority in early 2000, and Thatcher wouldn't have got a majority at all. So this winner-takes-all system, which is what it is, gives parties who have a minority of the vote numerically in the country an enormous advantage. So it's unlikely, though I hope I'm wrong. I mean, it'd be fantastic if Labour pulled off a surprise triumph, but it seems unlikely. So the situation could be very interesting if May wins, but with a tiny majority, so small that the SNP, the Scottish National Party vote in Scotland, Labour and the odd Green, if elected, could challenge her on most issues, because there's general agreement on the social services on the side of the progressive side of Parliament. And that would be considered a defeat that could open up a can of worms inside the Conservative Party. There would be a challenge to Theresa May's leadership fairly soon, and there's everything to play for. The question is this. If Corbyn loses the election, it is assumed by many that he should or will or could resign as leader of the Labour Party. I don't think he's going to do that, because in the old days, if you lost an election, you stayed on and fought again. This idea of pandering to media savagery and unrest and resigning is a very recent occurrence. When Ed Miliband resigned after he was defeated, I, for one, was surprised. Why? Why didn't he stay on and fight again? And the reason for him resigning was that the Blairites were on his back because they had been backing his brother. And he'd given this pledge, if I lose, I'm going to resign the leadership and you can elect your own, whereas instead the party members elected Jeremy Corbyn. So Corbyn is going to carry on and fight for the project for as long as he can. So British politics is going to be neither strong and stable unless the Tories win a landslide, and that would be a disaster, in my opinion, for the country. It would, without doubt, make Scotland quit and become an independent state. I think the Scots in particular, even though there's been a slight rise in the Tory vote there, are not going to take a Conservative government running the country for another 5 years again. So nothing will be settled in this election in any eventuality. The campaign has been quite strange. In the north of England, huge crowds have turned out in their thousands to greet Jeremy Corbyn.
There is nothing inevitable about this election. Let's go out there and show we can do this thing together.
Surprising the media covering it, who say we've never seen crowds like this in an election, because previous elections have largely been contested on extremely well orchestrated crowds of a few hundreds, got there by the party machine to be cheering the leaders. This is still happening with Theresa May. In previous elections, the bulk of the campaigns have been fought on television. So who does well on television, who's dressed better, who's looking good, becomes extremely important. Interestingly enough, even on that front, Jeremy Corbyn over the last few weeks has been performing extremely well. He's now become very expert at dealing with some of his questioners. He doesn't lose his cool, he retains his calm and explains what Labour Party policies are, doesn't make any unprovoked or over-the-top attacks against his opponents, and this is now beginning to win him support, more and more support. Whether there will be enough on election day remains to be seen. What of Theresa May herself? She is not a natural politician. She's uneasy. She has been appointed from within the Tory party, backed by the civil service and the state bureaucracy, brought forward after being thoroughly briefed by her spin doctors, which is all fine, but she's still deeply unconvincing. And the strong and stable slogan which her Australian spin doctor has provided her is proving to be a loser. A few days ago, a new exhibition opened in London. It had an image of the Prime Minister devised by one of the country's most gifted montage artists, Peter Kennard and Cat Phillips, and with a poem to accompany it, written by Kate Tempest, one of our young poets, very effective performance artist and extremely popular amongst the young.
I'm Kate, I'm a friend of Peter's and a big admirer of his work. Given the particular moment in time that it is, I was on the tube coming here today and was just looking at everyone and being like, are you a Tory? You know, are you going to do this? Like, is this going to be, you know, suddenly it becomes this very divisive thing. And I think it's important to just remember and reconnect that we have to trust people and that whichever way it goes, I'm really glad that we're here doing this, that Peter's making the work that he's making and that Kat is making the work that she's making. I feel very humbled to be a part of it. So I'm just going to read my poem and I hope it's worth you all standing in the street for, I don't know, who knows. It's my poem. Strong and stable into ruin, school kids on the hunt for lunch. Cut the apron strings, at least it keeps the bastards lean and gets the scroungers off the couch. Murdoch headlines, leeches for the letting of our bloodlust. Blame it on the migrants suffocating in containers. Blame it on the Muslims or whichever current favourite takes the weight of our collective hate and keeps the nation safe. Privatise and privatise in private, let the nurses burn, along with every other resident who voices their concern. And yes, divide the country into will they never learn and will they never stop? Then bring the army out to guard us. Saying those sick-hearted martyrs will not test our liberal values. Locked in a panopticon, we're volatile and fragile. Such stability. Suicides increasing, more rough sleepers, ugly words in public places, fear and doubt, and all the racists have come out to show their faces. Under May, there is a gulf that separates and seems to gape a little wider every day. Now watch her prey on every tragedy. Divide, divide and frenzy up the nastiness, the them and us, the human cost, the heightened threat. We must be watched, clocked and marked and kept and blocked. If this is strength, then we're all fucked. But give them an inch and they'll set up shop. I want to create a really hostile environment. Her words, not mine.